lots of things had changed. They'd been on the road for 3 years promoting it because, it was nearly 4 years between first and second record. Not for want of not doing it, but just because they're on the road, they're promoting, the album's absolutely massive. The industry was changing rapidly. Record sales were dipping enormously, but there was a lot of expectation. They're like, as people went from selling like 4 million albums to selling 500,000 albums. Now I think even 500,000 would be considered huge, but it was rapidly changing.
Hello, all, and welcome to another episode of The Record Process. We are thrilled to have with us this week the incredibly iconic and legendary producer, audio engineer, and composer, Mr. Warren Huart. You may know him from his YouTube series, Produce Like a Pro, but he stops by our show to talk about his history working with the chart-topping American rock band, the Fray. From mixing the first record to the highs and lows that came with the self-titled sophomore album. As is customary with Warren, we also get into talking about some studio essentials, some of the stuff that served him well in making these records with the Fray, and some of the stuff that didn't always work so well. We also get a sneak peek at Warren's new book, which is perhaps the most comprehensive guide to home audio recording yet. It is incredibly difficult to have a conversation with this man, no matter who you are, and not learn something and not walk away feeling inspired to go create. And I think you'll know exactly what I mean by that very soon. Our episode is coming up right after this. So many of the albums that we'll be highlighting this season on The Record Process share one very important theme. And that's the idea of technology helping musicians and creators overcome the collaborative restrictions that once came along with geographic location. Thanks to companies like Audio Movers, real-time remote audio production and the tools that make it possible are more powerful than ever. Their groundbreaking Listen To plugin allows you to stream, record, and collaborate on high-quality audio in real time and is used on a daily basis by world-class audio engineers and professionals at places like Capitol and Abbey Road Studios. Their new Pro plan allows you to stream up to 150 users simultaneously, includes custom branding, and even allows you to stream MIDI data in real time. So head on over to audiomovers.com and enter the code RECORDPRO to get 1 month free off your Pro membership today. So as you already know, we do a lot of talking about the creation of original music here on The Record Process. I mean, that's kind of our thing. But it can also be fun to put your own spin on an old classic and tell the world something else about yourself through something like a cover song. Cover songs can be a really interesting way to connect with your existing fan base, or even a way to put yourself in front of new audiences through shared musical tastes. And our friends at DistroKid have made it super simple to upload a cover of your favorite song while allowing them to handle all of the back-end licensing work that can really be a headache for independent artists. DistroKid will notify the composer and publisher of its release, they will pay the necessary licensing fee, and they will take care of all the other legal red tape involved with releasing a cover song on a streaming platform, allowing you to fully focus on enjoying the process of putting your unique artistic spin on that recording. If you're already a DistroKid member, you can access this as you're uploading your track for $12 a year per song. Or if you're not yet a member and you'd like to sign up for DistroKid, you can use the link in our show notes to get 30% off of your first year's membership. Mr. Warren Huart, welcome to The Record Process. What a treat to have you. How are you?
I'm doing rather well, thank you ever so much on this lovely December evening for all of us now, actually.
Yes, and we will suspend reality and pretend that you didn't say that, because this probably won't come out for another month or two with the season. But yes, that is where we are. Full disclosure, before the holiday run up, everybody's getting everything finished, racing around. You're treating yourself to some lovely recitals out there, as we talked about earlier.
Yes.
But we do appreciate you carving out some time to come talk with us and our audience. I know even behind the scenes, a few people that I've teased, and mentioned that we're going to be talking about this record. We're very excited about it. So with that, let us not waste any more time and dive in. The reason we have asked you here, in fact, obviously you've had a hand in making quite a number of records over the years, and anybody that knows you knows that. But we wanted to ask you specifically about your journey and the story behind one pretty darn popular record by a band called the Fray. And it actually is, in fact, that self-titled record that they released quite some time ago. So
I know it used to feel like a couple of years ago. And then I woke up one day and was like, geez, that's like over a decade ago now.
Right.
Wow.
And you know what? And I mean, and it's still, and so we as practice always kind of like dive back into whatever record we're going to be covering, as just music fans first and foremost. And man, Tom can attest to this. Turn that record on and immediately I'm like, man, that's a performance. And it just kind of, it grips you. It has depth. It's sound. And I mean, Tom's in our studio treated space that they did a lovely job in. That's our listening room. That's our mix suite. But like, even where I am, just like, from a bare bones standpoint, I was like, dude, it even sounds good in a bad room. Oh, that's amazing. Like,
oh, you're very kind.
And you, I think, had something to do with that. I would imagine, that's part of the reason why, as someone that has had a long career and shares the perspective in capturing these records specifically as an engineer, we were really excited to kind of get your take on the journey of how that album came to be. So how'd you get linked up with the band? Because I think the story, and if I'm looking at the discography correctly, it started before this record in question, right? You did something, worked with them a little bit before that, right?
Yes, I'd worked on the first album. I'd done quite a few things with them. They got signed to Epic, and their A&R guy, his name was Mike Flynn, had done lots and lots of records together. And he played me, I can't remember what album we were doing. We were working on a record at Track Records, if anybody remembers that. I think it was on Lancashire. It's been bought now. And I think it was started by Emmylou Harris, if I'm right. And it was a beautiful, beautiful studio. We were there working on a project, and I can't remember what the project was now. That's really silly, but, it's like 15 plus years ago. So we're doing a project, and we sat in his Ford F-150 truck and listened to a demo, and I believe it was on cassette. I think he had a cassette player in his truck like 15 years ago. It wasn't even a CD. We listened to a demo, and it was Cable Car. And I remember, hearing it and thinking, this band's great. And it was people sort of like used to compare them and say, oh, it was kind of a Coldplay thing. But the funny thing was, we didn't hear it like that at all. We heard it as like a American piano-driven band, but there had an element of Americana in there. There was something that just felt real. One of my favorite records from the 90s was the Counting Crows' second album.
Oh, so good.
It's such a great record. You may remember that song, I'm Not Sleeping Anymore. And it had that orchestral part in the middle, and it's just so Beatley and yet so Americana at the same time. It was like the Beatles and Americana had a baby and created that second Counting Crows record. And which I found out, my friend Brad actually engineered that record, and masterpiece of an album. And so when I heard the Fray, those early demos, I was like, ooh, this could be the same kind of thing, kind of Americana, but with a little bit of a dose of like more British melody stuff. So the edge and the feel of a great Americana kind of Tom Petty thing, but with piano, but with a bit of like extra melody in there. And so I was very, very excited. And then I got offered to do the second Hot Hot Heat record. So I started the second Hot Hot Heat record while they started tracking the Fray record. And they did it super quickly in Indiana. This is the first album. I came in at the end to do fixes. They had tracked How to Save a Life, the song, but they'd done it with like hot rods on the drums, and the piano was kind of muffled and subdued.
Okay.
But we listened to it and we decided really all it needed was like new drums, a new piano. So Aaron was in New York and he retracked the piano on the same day that I retracked the drums on that single at my studio that I had at the time. And I had a TAC Scorpion, like a really inexpensive console. The mics were like Audix, like cheap, like 87 copies. I think they were $300. I think it was may have been $300 for the pair, but a pair of like Audix for room mics. Plus I had 57's mic in the wall for room mics. The only expensive mics I had at that time were a pair of 414s. I had a pair of 414s as overheads. We had rented out all of our drum kits for this festival that was happening in LA. So the only drum kit we had was my Supraphonic snare drum with a Rogers, I believe it was actually a big kick, like a 24-inch kick, but a very shallow kick, and it was beaten up. And I don't think we had any toms, and we had one ride cymbal, which had a big crack in it, and a pair of hi-hats. And that's the drums on How to Save a Life, the song.
Which
I'm still proud of that drum
sound. Which has been played once or twice since then, I think.
Yeah, at one stage we had that song, it was the most downloaded single of all time, when it was back in the days of digital downloads only. And then I think it holds some kind of record for licensing.
It must. I mean, anybody that you'd have to be living under a rock in that like 5-year period to have not heard that song. It was everywhere. And I mean, talk about the sync stuff. It's maybe one of the best and greatest syncs of all time with the TV show that I can, or anybody from our generation can probably think of.
Totally. It's like a millennial anthem. Zach Braff lives a few doors up the street here from me. And, Zach obviously had that show Scrubs, and he loved the Fray. He loved a lot of music that I produced or engineered. So thank you, Zach. You did a lot of good for us. And there's an episode of Scrubs. There's lots of episodes of Scrubs where they play different tracks from the Fray's first and second record. But there is one episode where he goes, "It's times like this I hear a Fray song playing in my head." And it starts playing Cable Car, and he's like, no, not that one, the other one. And then it plays How to Save a Life.
The wall break. That's wow. So he's a fan of what you made. That's great.
Oh yeah. I mean, I produced this album by Jay Clifford, who has a band called Jump Little Children. We did a solo record with him. And Zach was a huge fan of that as well, which is great because he was an independent artist. And then Zach directed and produced the video for the single, and that really helped it get lots of plays. Inadvertently, there's a lot of stuff that I produced or engineered or both or wrote on, and Zach Braff was a fan of it. I think there was just a period of time. It was a good 4 or 5 years of my life where I was working with like Augustana, the Fray, James Blunt, and then Brendan James, and we got a lot of good stuff from it. It was either piano or guitar driven, but it was Hot AC, when Hot AC was king in like 2005 to about 2010, that sort of 5-year period.
Yep.
Where Goo Goo Dolls, I didn't work with the Goo Goo Dolls, but they rehearsed at my studio. It was just that sort of period. It was a great time because everybody was about the song. The production was definitely about performances, getting great tones. It was a good, fun time to make records,
Stellar. Love that. So you met them on their first record.
And then the next thing that happened was we did a cover of Happy Christmas War Is Over, because at that point they were the biggest artist on iTunes. They were they had the most downloaded single of all time. This is when, downloads were a thing. Nobody buys downloads anymore. But at that point, I think they had 4 million downloads of just How to Save a Life, the single. It was stupid.
Wow.
It was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's streamed over 1 billion times, I think, now just on Spotify. It's 1 billion. So iTunes were just throwing opportunities at them. So there's this thing called the iTunes Pass. And what they would do is we would record we did an EP, like a Christmas EP. We did live recordings of the band from shows, and then they would send it back to me, and I had this Neve 8058, and I'd mix on my Neve 8058. And I mean, I was getting solid work. It was like 9 months of just Fray EPs, either recording them or mixing live stuff from the road. We did a great single with Emmylou Harris and Isaac doing a cover of Boulder to Birmingham. Birmingham, as we would say in England. Which was
there we go.
Just
yes. I have some English friends that would be like, I've got a qualm about Warren's pronunciation. There we go. No, I love that, man.
Boulder to Birmingham. Boulder to Birmingham. Boulder to Birmingham, which is, of course, her signature song. So we did a cover of that. But what happened is they wanted to do a Christmas single. So we did Happy Christmas War is over. They were coming into Vegas, which is very un-Fray-like. If you know the Fray, Vegas and Fray doesn't make any sense. But they were going to Vegas for the Vegas Music Awards, and they had won. It was still between the first and second albums, so they had won like Best New Artist or something like that. So I fly into Vegas, and we go to the Palms, and the Palms has a really killer studio. It's a little strange because it's the live room has kind of a beam in it, and it's a strange shape. And they have a Neve, but I think it's a V series. It runs super, super hot. But I have some interesting stories about that. So this was like the first time we had done a track from scratch together. All the other stuff I had done was either mixing or like half done stuff like acoustic guitar vocals and stuff. But this was a full band. And not only that, it was huge pressure because we had a kids choir coming in, and it was pretty much band arriving in the afternoon. By the end of the evening, we had to have a finished song. So they had to learn Happy Christmas War was over. They had to perform it. The kids choir had to record. And it was a Saturday, and I was flying home on Sunday, and I had to mix it. Because you remember back in those days, they used to put songs up on Tuesdays, not Fridays. Yeah. So it had to be mixed and mastered by Monday to be put up for Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. So it was a Saturday. So it was like,
and with a kids choir, no less. I mean, a couple years ago, that's a whole wrangling logistics nightmare in and of itself, I'd imagine. We did a Queen cover set like 3-4 years ago, and brought a
I'm a huge Queen fan.
Yes, and brought a local. Well, I'll have to send you the video and get your critique. God help me. We found, actually, interestingly enough, a local high school choir in one of the Philly suburbs that had done a Queen medley a few years, and it went a little viral. And we were like, hey, do you want to come do this down the street, like Amazing. With a real rock band? It was a lot of fun, a whole lot of story. But anyway, yes, but a lot of moving parts with all of that happening, I bet.
No, that's amazing. No, so yeah, you're exactly right. It's definitely a logistical nightmare, I suppose is a strong word, but it's very applicable. So just to add a whole Spaniard in the works, as John Lennon would say, we're there. The band arrive 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm getting mics up and running, plugged in. Everything's getting ready because I flew in that morning. The assistant, Mark, comes up to me and he goes, Warren, the AC has gone down on the power supplies for the console. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, console's overheating. Now, bear in mind, this is a V-Series. I believe it was a V-Series, top of my head. But anyway, it's one of those Neves of the 80s that ran really, really hot. You can pretty much fry an egg on them. So when the power supplies and the console itself is not being cooled by the AC, it gets bad. So what started happening is all the auxiliaries shut off. So suddenly, that was the first thing that went down. I could get level from the band, but I couldn't send a headphone mix to them. I had no way to get a headphone mix. So for about 3 hours, I'm line checking them by running into the control room, running into the live room, and going, hey, that was really good. Do you mind doing that? And not mentioning a word, not mentioning anything to anybody because I don't want to throw everybody into panic. So not only am I under pressure to get this done, I have to drag out the whole process while they try to find somebody to fix the AC. So it's about 2.5 hours, I won't exaggerate, about 2.5 hours of just me running in and out, control room, live room, talking to them, making it look like I was coming in to kind of hang and be like, yeah, Ben, I really like what you were doing. Could you play the hat again here on that part? Yeah, and Dave, and just waffling on. It was pretty chaotic. So, but it actually came to a point where I'd sound checked everybody. I got levels, but they were starting to look at me like, why are we not hearing each other in our headphones? So I had to pull everybody aside. And so I sit everybody down. I'm like, guys, I just want to let you know we've kind of got a bit of a problem. And as I say that, Mark comes running in. It's fixed. The AC's back on. I was like, no, we're good. And everybody's like, what? What just happened? I was like, nothing. It's fine. We're all good. And so it was just one of those kind of, it was pretty, thank you, Mark, for fixing it. And so, but by that stage, it's probably about 5:30 or 6, kids choir's arriving at 7. So we have a whopping hour or whatever it is to run through the song and record it, a song that they'd only been listening to driving over, So luckily they're good. They got on it, and Isaac did a really good job. And I know the song really well. I'm a huge John Lennon fan and a huge Beatles fan, and obviously,
that's one of the best Christmas songs of all time. Yeah,
it's phenomenal. Yeah, it's got so much more of a message. It's a message of peace and love, and all of the wonderful things that from that period. And my friend Jack is one of the engineers on it. Strangely enough.
Oh, brilliant.
But I've covered it with like 4 different artists, one of those being Daniel Powter, and all these guys and girls have had different hits with it. But yeah, wonderful, wonderful song. So we were able to get into a zone and start tracking basics within an hour. And I think take 3 or 4 was the one. Maybe we comped the bridge from one or something. We didn't do anything crazy. I didn't go in there and edit drums to a grid or anything. It was a performance. It sounded great. And then the kids start to arrive as we're finishing up that take. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. There wasn't really enough room for all the kids. So we had to we had a vocal booth on the side, and I think they wanted to run it with the band as well. Luckily, we had a safety copy. We'd done that 2 or 3, 4 takes or whatever. So we did actually end up running it with the band as well, which I think is good, because I imagine if you bring in some kids, they want to feel like they're part of something. So they were singing along while they could look through the window and see, guys in a band that I'm sure they admired and knew were famous playing. So it was a wonderful experience. So yeah, we wrapped it like 8 or 9 o'clock after getting all the kids. I had to rotate them because there wasn't very many in and out. And I went back to the room, slept, got on a plane first thing in the morning, flew back on Sunday, mixed the song. Monday morning, came in, checked it, uploaded it to the mastering engineer. And I can't remember who it was. If I did, you'd know why. So I uploaded to the mastering engineer. Everything seems to be good. Tuesday morning, I wake up at 7 a.m., super excited to hear the new release that I had just finished, recorded and done in 2 days. I go to iTunes, I download the song, I pay my 99 cents, and it starts off mono. So this is Christmas, and what have you done? Another year older, a new one just begun, and so Merry Christmas, and Happy Christmas, Happy Christmas. And it's supposed to go wide because it's like piano and vocal, and it's specifically narrow, and I had no low end on the piano. So it's like mid-rangey. But then, when the band comes in, it goes left and right, LCR, and the low end comes back in the piano, and the drums come in, and there's like a harmony. Didn't do that. It stayed mono.
Oh, no.
So I'm calling the A&R guy at 7 a.m., 7:01 or whatever it was, because I literally had woken up at 7 and bought the thing. Calling the A&R guy, and eventually I woke him up. And I woke him up, and I was like, Mike, song's in mono. And he said, what do you mean? I was like, it's in mono. And I'm like, it's the left-hand side only. And he's like, how do you know? I was like, because I can hear hi-hat the whole time down the center. It's like, no, sorry, right-hand side only. My fault. Right-hand side only because I could hear the hi-hat because I was Panic Audience perspective. So we eventually get hold of iTunes, Apple, I don't know, maybe 6 hours later after it was now like in the top 10, visible top 10 songs because it's a new Fray song. And we'd say to them, you only uploaded one side. And they're like, how do you know? And we're like, because it's only playing in mono. There's it's one channel. Somehow or another, it had been left channel twice. We don't know where it happened, at the mastering, somebody, whatever. But somehow or another, they'd uploaded one channel twice. And their response was, and I quote, well, nobody's complained.
Well,
For real. I think it took months for them to eventually swap it out for the real version. It was so exhausting. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sitting here with my Apple Watch and my Apple iPhone, talking to you on an Apple laptop, looking over there at an Apple Tower.
They've smoothed things over since then, I guess. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, it's an inevitability. I think as creatives, so many of us use Apple products now. I mean, I also have a lot of PC stuff as well. I mean, I run businesses, so my son is a gamer, and like everybody of his age group.
Oh, there you go. He's all in the PC Android world then. Yeah. And what's interesting about that too is I think that kind of sums up something really interesting and special. It's like, well, nobody's complained. It's like, even especially coming from this creative side, trying to that whole story, that whole full day span of trying to get everything, trying to fix all the mistakes, trying, just overcoming that whole thing. And it comes out in mono, and how many people out there were like, this sounds a little different, but cool. But I like it, you know what I mean? And and wouldn't even think, and I think it's Obviously, it gets sorted. We've had horror stories. Things get leaked. A distributor puts it out early because the street date got moved one place, but in one territory it didn't, and it's the wrong version. All those things.
Oh, yeah. I've had all those things.
Those stakes are much higher because it's instantly just at the top of the iTunes chart the second it goes out. Wow. It can even happen to the Fray. Look at that.
So, Warren, you had this Christmas song. That was your first, I guess, top to bottom with the Fray.
Yeah, first top to bottom. Everything else on the first album was fixing things. I did a lot of editing, recomping vocals, things like that. No tuning. What was interesting on the first record, I did 0 tuning on Isaac. It's a very raw sounding record, but I did do overdubs and re-editing of things, like recomping.
Amazing.
They'd moved very fast on that first record. The engineer had only worked from 12 till 6, so he only did these 6-hour sessions. So even though they were in there for a few weeks, there was a lot of rough edges. And they didn't have any leverage. When they did that first record, it was done on such a tiny budget. I mean, comparatively now, it's probably a big budget,
Right.
But for the time, it wasn't one of those $500,000 records. I think all in, including the mixing, was $100K. And that's still a lot of money. But remember, the mixers in those days were $5,000 to $7,000 a song. So 2/3 of your budget was the mix budget. And then they had to fly all the band members out to live in Indiana. So it was in that 100,000, half of it went to the mixer. The other half was a lot of the other half was studio costs, flying the band out, sticking them up in hotels. It was made.
It goes quick.
Yeah, it was probably
10
or 20 grand of actual recording.
Yeah.
The rest, for an album that sold 4 million copies. We could all be so lucky.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? It's all kind of relative when it comes to those budgets. And I think a lot of even independent artists nowadays or talented musicians that are in their bedroom making records for what amounts to a couple $100 or the cost of a laptop and an interface are what the hell? It's it was just different because time costs more in a large studios. And there was not that that user and commercial consumer level technology yet. It was either you had serious gear in a studio or you weren't probably making records,
Yeah.
If you're an audio engineer or musician that's dedicated to creating and releasing new music consistently, then you already know that process can be long, complex, and often expensive. Especially while you're trying desperately not to sacrifice the type of quality that is crucial for your mixes to stand up to those big budget productions. Producer and friend of the record process, Jay Moss, has reimagined these roadblocks to quality that plague us all. With the help of world-renowned sound engineers, Jay developed an AI-based platform called Master, which offers you the ability to quickly upload your song and receive a high-quality mastered edition in minutes, all at a price point that won't break the bank with each new mix revision. The platform also allows you to easily collect feedback from clients and collaborators, and it even caters to the perfectionist in us all by allowing you to quickly compare and contrast different iterations of each track as you make those final subtle tweaks. So for a limited time this season, you as a Record Process listener can not only try Master for free, but you can also receive a 20% discount on your first membership by using the code PROCESS on their website at checkout. So hit the link in our show notes or visit maastr.io for more info. So a lot of people think that Oxford Pennant makes, pennants. The triangular wool flag type things that usually have a sports team's logo or the name of a place printed on them. Well, to be honest, that is what I thought too before my band, The Wonder Years, had the chance to work with them. Through that process, we realized just how much care they put into their beautifully crafted, iconic keepsakes that remind us who we are and why we do what we do. They've teamed up with some massive artists in the process, bands like My Chemical Romance, Wilco, and 21 Pilots, just to name a few. And they even offer custom shop orders for artists, companies, and unique events or special occasions. So please do yourself a favor and head over to oxfordpennant.com and use the code RECORD15 to receive 15% off your first retail purchase from their web store. Okay, so moving through that whole experience with that first record, and it was that record exploded. So let's get to the second record then, after having this first like kind of test drive with the Christmas cover. So then what does that second record start to look like? What's they call you up, timeline, like how does that change? And what's that chapter start to look like?
Well, they'd started doing a lot of pre-production, which to be honest was songwriting, because what happens with a lot of very successful bands, and I think they're a unique experience for this, what happens with a lot of successful bands is they have their first record, and as you've probably heard the phrase, it takes you a whole lifetime to write your first record. That's what happened. They'd had all these songs, and it was their first album, comes out, it was absolutely huge, sells 4 million copies. So now they're going in to make a second album. Lots of things had changed. They've been on the road for 3 years promoting it, because, it was nearly 4 years between first and second record. Not for want of not doing it, but just because they're on the road, they're promoting, the album's absolutely massive. The industry was changing rapidly. Record sales were dipping enormously, but there was a lot of expectation on it. They're like, as people went from selling like 4 million albums to selling 500,000 albums. Now I think even 500,000 would be considered huge, but it was rapidly changing. It wasn't so much the streaming thing; it was the digital download. Streaming, it was a worry about once you had digital tracks, you could send them to anybody. So people weren't buying as much. CD sales had peaked with them at about 2006. If you go and look at sales numbers, 5 and 6 was actually the peak years, but like 7 and 8 was a massive rapid drop off. So here we were going in to do the second album. Everybody's super nervous in the music industry, like, oh no, and the expectations were super, super high. So they'd finished touring. I'd actually helped them get a huge rig. So what I had done is I'd spec'd out and put together like an HD rig, and I spec'd out microphones and preamps and everything. And I had this mobile rig, and I flew out a couple of times to help them use it and everything. And the whole idea was they were supposed to be writing on the road, because here they are with this massive expectations. We got to write our second record, but we're touring all the time, to promote this massive album. And they roll into pre-production, and they've got half a dozen ideas between them, nothing really fully fledged. The big song was called Amistad, but didn't have a chorus, which of course is You Found Me. I found God on the corner of First and Amistad. So they just were calling it Amistad. No chorus, no you found me lying on the floor. That didn't exist. It was just chord sequence for a chorus. I think even then it wasn't even a finished chord sequence for a chorus. It was just that everybody knew, that I found God on the corner of First and Amistad. Everybody knew that was a hit verse. Like, that is a great verse. We need a chorus. So they were in pre-production, and they'd been doing demos and all this kind of stuff. And they had 10 or 12 songs that were like sort of finished, but didn't have finished choruses. A couple that were 75% of the way there, a couple that were like 5% of the way there, But the pressure was on. Book the studio. So I'd been asked which studio to record at. And of course, I live in LA, and I love Sunset Sound and The Village and East West and United and all those kinds of studios. So when they asked me, I was like, I think for them, I was like, Sunset Sound would be perfect for you, because they wanted somewhere that was like very like classy and classic and had some stuff. However, there was this reluctance to go to a big city. They were like, we don't want to go to somewhere where there's loads of distractions, because we've just been on the road. And the problem with going to LA for them or going to New York was clubs, and there's always going to be somebody famous that wants to drop by. I've done records in LA. When I did a record with Aerosmith, it was like, Johnny Depp wants to come by, and because there was all these different like famous people dropping by all the time, and that sounds like fun when you're the engineer to like hang out. I remember when with Aerosmith in particular, I remember I'm blanking on his name. Oh my god. As Stan Lee comes by, because they were doing music for a musical he was trying to put together, but just before he died. So Stan Lee comes by. I mean, it's ridiculous. Stan Lee, followed by Johnny Depp, followed by Julian Lennon, followed by Lana Del Rey. It was like, whoa, it was crazy. They didn't want that. They wanted to get away and go somewhere where there'd be no pop buys, no stuff, because they felt the pressure, which is really understandable. So we ended up going to Sausalito, the record plant, which is simply known as the plant in Sausalito, now owned by Ken Calais, by the way. Shout out to Ken Calais, the great Ken Calais, who produced Rumours, as I'm sure you know. and Tusk and a whole bunch of other records afterwards. This is before Ken, but we went there and apparently they went to go and look at it. They looked at studios without me. There was other people involved in the album, but of course I was probably the only guy involved in the album that had experience of working in all of these studios all over the world that could kind of assess it. So I asked all the right questions. I said, when you go in there, make sure they have a tech. I was like, they have to have a full-time tech, because I went online and it looks pretty. It's got 70, a lot of Songs in the Key of Life was done there. The Whole of Rumors was done there. Sly and the Family Stone Fresh, one of the greatest albums of all time, was also recorded in there. And I'm like, yeah, this has got what we need. It's got the, I hate the word, but I'm going to use it, the vibe that we want. But it's got an old 28068 stuck together, Neve 8068. So I was like, please, 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 make sure that they have a full-time tech. Because the last thing I want to do is walk into a studio I've never been in my life, and the Neve doesn't work very well, and there's nobody there to fix it. Because it was in Sausalito, which is, in the Bay Area, the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. Not like, don't get me wrong, it's not in the middle of the desert, but it's definitely not in like LA where I know all the techs. They could be there in 20 minutes. This is like 7 hours to come up and fix it. And so they asked all the right questions. They came back to me. They sent me an email. Yeah, they've got a full-time tech. It's going to be great. Apparently the console was recapped within the last year, and it's fantastic and amazing. Said all the right things. In retrospect, probably a little bit too well. You know what I mean? All of the right things. When somebody answers so positively about everything, you're like, life is not like that. There's got to be a few things that are kind of wrong.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we go up there, they've done a lot of pre-production, but we knew going into the studio there was going to be a continuation of pre-production because there was all these half-finished songs, which was fine. It's the Fray. It's fine. And they've been on the road and blah, blah, blah. So we get in there and day one is getting tones. And so I come in, super excited. I say to my assistant, I was like, wow, so how long have you been here? He's like, 2 weeks. And I'm like, you're like, okay.
I barely know where the bathroom is.
Yeah. I'm like, well, have you used this console before? He's like, no, never been in this room before. I'm like, do you know Neve series? Do you know 8068? It's like, no. And I'm like, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. I've got a guy that doesn't know the patch bay, has never used a console. Because the one thing you want with an assistant, there's no disrespect to the assistant. I mean, it's not his fault, he was fine. But the one thing is you hope that the assistant knows the patch bay, because they're usually labeled in a way that's unique to the studio. And this was, I believe it was all TRS. And I'm looking at it, so the 1/4-inch size jacks. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I see like 1 to 2 8068s means there's 64 channels, 2 32 channel consoles strapped together with a center section. And so I'm looking at it and I see some things that I understand, but the rest of it's trial and error. I'm like, well, I think that's the inserts. I think there's a direct outs. Hopefully that's what it is. And there's the groups. And okay, let's get going. So channel 1, stick up the kick drum mic, channel 1, pull up the fader, no sound whatsoever. I'm like, this is not a good start.
Yeah.
So I said to him, can you do me a favor? Can you go down to the end of the console? Because this is what you always do with consoles that are like modular. You can actually just flip out the mic pre's and EQs and then drop them in. Yep. I said, can you pull out channel 64 and bring it up to here? And he goes, how do you do that? And I was like,
oh boy. Yeah. Yep.
Like, So I go down channel 64 and I say, you see these two screws here? You just bring it down and prop it in and so I show him how to do it. Again, no disrespect to him. He'd never been in the room, didn't know how to use it. So we pop in channel 64 into 1, and I believe it worked. I got level. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to put a little bit of 60 on that and cut a little 220 and whatever. I put the EQ button in, and it goes into EQ, into DC offset, so it's only printing one half of the waveform. And I'm like, oh no. Okay, so I'm like, okay, can we mark this channel as working, but the EQ doesn't work? And so he's like, put a bit of tape on it, take that channel out. We pull another channel 63 and put it in. And I can't remember. I think on the first 10 channels on the drums, I think only 4 of the first 10 worked. And we just had to keep flipping backwards and forwards. It was like, and I'm like, well, where's the tech? And the guy's like, we don't have a tech. And I'm just like,
of course not.
So this is just one of those kind of war stories thing. Again, just like we did the Palms, No conversation. Band doesn't know. You don't talk anything about it. You're doing all this stuff all the time. You know, if Ben's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, oh, yeah, just line checking, couple of things. Just need to trying out this different compressor, just checking out a couple of things, and never, ever let the band know. Afterwards, you know, after the album was finished, we talked about some of the stuff that we had to overcome. Actually, it's something we did actually get to the problem a lot earlier. I think it was at the end or the middle of the first week. Anyway, as we all know, and we were talking about earlier, Fray were a big band. They'd sold 4 million records. They had booked 3 months at the studio to make this album. 3 months. So we get all the sounds up. We're a couple of days into it, and we would go, and there was this really nice kind of restaurant, breakfasty place. It wasn't high end. It was just this nice kind of like cool place. And it was about 5 minutes walk from the studio. So we'd just get out, you know. So we'd walk over and, you know, have breakfast, or in this case, lunch. So we go and have lunch. I think it's like day 3 or 4. And we come back down, we walk back down, because, you know, it's right on the bay. It's really beautiful. You know, you can see the sea, you can see boats and everything. And we come back down, and the assistant has the keys, and he puts the keys in the lock, and he's like, keys aren't working. I'm like, no, don't be silly. Give me the keys. So he gives me the keys, and there's like 4 keys on there. So I try every one. And I'm like, he's right. The keys aren't working. So he calls the quote unquote owner, and says the keys aren't working. And he's like, oh, what are you talking about? You know, so the owner drives down like 15 minutes later. Meanwhile, we're all just sitting outside the studio. Like, what's going on? You know, owner comes down, brings out his keys. Keys aren't working. Looks at the lock. Lock's very pretty and brand new. So then we get this kind of downtime for another half an hour. Guy comes back and tells us that basically he owns the gear in the studio, but the building is owned by somebody else. And the person that owned the building had seen that this hugely successful band that had sold 4 million records was coming in to record an album. Meanwhile, the guy that owned the gear in it was renting the studio and was seriously in arrears on his rent. So the owner was basically like, comes down, changed the locks while we were out, and just to leverage and basically like, give me my check. You know, knowing that the way these things work is you pay 50% up front. So I don't know what the studio was, probably $1,500 a day. So $1,500 a day for 90 days, 45 days of it. You know, somebody had got a quick math, 22 and a half. Somebody had got a $67,500 check that, you know what I mean, had been paid to him, but he hadn't taken any of that money and given it to the landlord, the guy that actually owned the building. So obviously a check was written. And about another half an hour later, that owner of the building comes down with the new keys and unlocks, takes the check, whatever. So it was an interesting first week.
Yep.
And I can't remember if I told them anything about the console after that. I think I just probably was like, that's enough drama for the first week.
Yeah, let's have a weekend. Well,
yeah, that's an insane first week.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
holy crap.
We were talking about going to Sunset, but the problem is like, how do you get that money back? I mean, that's and it's the label wrote the check, but it's the band's money. It comes off their recoup. Nobody in their right mind is going to sacrifice like $60,000 or $70,000 worth of studio time. You just grin and bear it. And I think we all laughed it off. We thought it was crazy, but obviously it was a funky old studio. You know, it was. Every other thing didn't work properly or didn't work at all.
Dude, and I'll put a quick pin and reaffirm what you just mentioned in terms of like working out of older legendary spaces like that, and Sunset having a tech and or somebody. And
Sunset Sound has 2 full-time techs, and if anything ever goes wrong in Sunset Sound, it is fixed within minutes, and they always have a backup.
Because the gear room so we did a record a couple years ago at Sunset with Joe Ciccarelli, and I mean, that A room, it's just marvelous. Like the experience to do it, and we did it the right way. Like, you know, 80% of it just all cut live in a room.
What year did you do it? Was Craig still alive, the manager?
I don't believe so. It was in 2017, 18.
Yeah, he was still alive.
I guess. Yeah.
It was a heavy smoker. He wore glasses, little heavy set. One of my favorite people in the world.
Well, we had a great experience, but I do remember as we were troubleshooting stuff, you know, they have all of those, like, you know, Joe would just be like, you know, a pot's bad or whatever. He's like, just can we get another blue stripe in here? And they're just pulling stuff out of nowhere. And I finally go look at the tech room and I'm just like, this is unreal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're turning stuff over. And that's important because that to you and someone who's in your role, it's like, that's time, that's money. 2
full-time techs. Yeah. And not just techs. I mean, Mick used to work for Trident in the late 70s. So Mick like built consoles.
Yeah.
The English guy that works there. And so you got guys like keeping this gear running that built this gear in the first place.
So that you don't have what happens there. There's a reason, right? It's like, that's why you have insurance for, 99.9% of the time your house isn't going to burn down. But the one time it does, you want insurance. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was doing some work with ATR services, doing tape machine stuff, Sunset Sound was always had so many cards sending back to us to recap and just like tune up. And they always had a healthy stock. So yeah, it's super important, especially with any old vintage gear. Knowing how to maintain it is as much importance as having it.
Yeah, it's super, super important. I mean, Sunset Sound, of all the studios I work at, and to be honest, United's amazing as well. East West is amazing. East West has that, has the Beach Boys Pet Sound room, which is like mint, and they keep it beautifully. United has a Neve console with all the API mic pre-outboard. I mean, it's just and then of course they have that Focusrite console in there, and everything is impeccable. When it comes to the surviving, just those studios alone, the ones that are all on Sunset Boulevard, those 3, East West, United, and Sunset, are all impeccably run, all have incredible studio managers. Like when Craig was running Sunset, it was like clockwork and no BS. He never gave you a hard time about booking or anything. He would just make things happen. Same thing with the other studios. Candace over at East West is unbelievable. United is run so beautifully. Rob ran it for years. I think he just left, but from top to bottom, the old studios that are still running have great managers, great staff, techs. The problem is that we all know that's not cheap. I mean, you've got people on staff that are getting paid proper wages, not interns, not working at $5 an hour. These are people that are at the top of their game, some of the best people in the business. So it's very, very hard to keep these studios running, at that level. And this studio was not running at that level.
And that was not the hand you were dealt with this record. So you're playing the hand that you're dealt, right? You got the locks changed, the checks cut, you're back in.
Yeah.
There's some really cool stories about these songs that, that brought this second record together. What do you remember about that once you got in and got in the flow? Because you had 3 months to do it, right?
Well, we had 3 months to do it. I grabbed this. I asked Eric to get this. This is called the drum dial.
Oh, yeah.
This is probably the secret to the record.
Okay.
Do you know the drum dial?
Yeah. I know all about drum dials, and I know that they are. Some people swear by them, and some people are like, I don't know, I've never had good luck. I'm taking it that you have had good luck and results.
Amazing.
Okay.
Amazing, and I'm the proof of the pudding. So the song Amistad, for instance. So we're there for 3 months, and it's not slow going, but it's not like rapidly going because, of course, it ended up being still a lot of pre-production, still a lot of songwriting in the studio. The Beatles did it on Sgt. Pepper on many albums. Bands get to that point where they spend a long time in the studio because they're still finishing up the songs. One of those songs, of course, is You Found Me. So we did You Found Me. The way I mic is fairly similar from room to room, unless there's something specific about a room, like, you mic like a little echo chamber or some rooms have like you crack open a door and there's like a slate room and you mic that, there's all kinds of fun
hallway, things. Whatever. Yeah.
The hallways, exactly.
Yep.
In this instance, I was pretty much like miking how I like to mic, which is, room mics, pull back in phase with the snare, highs and lows. I like highs facing down the kit and then lows miking the floor. So I did all of that. And I was lucky. They had a lot of the mics I love. And we also rented and brought some of the ones we like 563, CMV 563 Gaffels on the ground for the room mics are just like, so good, so good. As many Neumanns as we could get, as many great mics as we could. So then what happened is we came away with touching on most of the band songs, not all the acoustic ones, none of Joe's songs weren't cut there or anything like that. But we ended up then going to their studio. So then there's another whole like 2-month period. And in this 2-month period of deadness, we buy a console. And we bought the API 1608. I believe the serial number was like 003. It was like the third one. And we bought it. It was phenomenal. I would say if anybody is listening to this podcast and wants to get a small format console that sounds classic and is modern and has every single accoutrement you can imagine on a console, the 1608 is unbelievable. So we bought that, and then we got like 4 channels of the 3124, which are the 312s, like the 4 312s in, and we got 4 of those. So now suddenly we have 32 channels, which is more than enough to track a band live. And we had the HD system already because they bought it for touring on the road,
right?
And it was like recording off of the monitor desk so they could record the full band live. So we had an HD system, we were rolling the HD system, and they had their own studio, so we were rolling it all in. And it was a studio, had glass. It was purpose built by a previous tenant, and it was in an industrial park in Denver. So this industrial thing, not glamorous at all, but inside it was a nice little studio, but a pretty decent sized live room. So what I did is I put the drums in a similar-ish place to the way I had done in Sausalito. I mic'd them with essentially the same microphones. It was a couple of things that were different, but, some of it's pretty de rigueur, 57 top, 57 bottom, all that kind of stuff. We rented the same 563, so they're on the ground. So we had the same microphones down there. We had Neumann's, I think it was 87s up the top. Anyway, and we had 99% the same microphones. But what we've been doing in Sausalito is keeping a fresh supply of drum heads, trying not to use too much EQ on the snare top, for instance, and just making sure that the head was pretty fresh. When it got to a point where it started to sound really dull and old, or approaching that, we would flip out the head and put a brand new one on. And because we had the drum dial, we would measure off exactly on every single lug what the tension was. And we got really good at it. So we would put on a brand new, like, Remo. I think we have going between Remo and Evans G2s. I think it was Ambassadors and G2s. And we would put on like maybe the Evans or whatever, and we would go back and recall it. And I'm telling you, it was like insane. We could have a take, change the head, go back 3 takes and listen to the new one and be like, there's no perceptible difference.
Wow.
But it got crazier. We decided with Armerstad, which was becoming You Found Me, but hadn't had the lyric finished until like the last week of the record. But with Armerstad, we hadn't got the drum beat right and didn't even have the chorus yet. So if you listen to that song, the verses and the bridge is all from Sausalito, and the choruses are all from the Fray studio. And all it is room mics measured the same distance away, the rooms ever so slightly different. All of the close mics sound exactly the same. And it is insane because then I start doubting my own sanity because we're going from Neve mic pre's to API mic pre's. And you start realizing that the actual instrument is the thing that ties things together. Because we got anal with the drum set. We're using exactly the same drum set. We're using the drum heads at exactly the same tension, the same cymbals, the same measured off distance on all the microphones, the same microphones. The only thing that's different is the room, which does make a difference. But the rooms in both of those studios were pretty dead, so they weren't adding a lot of ambience. And we baffled the same way. I got tight baffles around the kit. There is a difference, but the difference is not as great as you would expect. It's pretty darn similar, and you don't, in the density of a mix, hear any difference in the snare. I challenge anybody to listen to that and tell me, because it's the same snare, same tension, thanks to our friend Drum Dial.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. Luckily, I mean, it wasn't like we went from a cavernous, huge room to a tiny little room. The rooms were very similar dimensions. So, yeah, pretty insane.
Wow. Well, and it's the same player, right? You know what I mean? So it's like
same
at the end
player.
Of the day, so many, if it was even a different player, or you had tried to change some things, tried to change like tweak tempo maps or whatever, you could have thrown the whole thing off. But the fact that it was, all of those factors at play, but wow, what an interesting experiment.
That's a fun tidbit.
Yeah. And clearly it worked, right? So you don't say, and this is the thing too, I think, and I know you're a strong proponent of this too, Warren, and a lot of the stuff that you put forward with your series, right? Is don't overthink it, right? It's like, don't be afraid to try something. And here it is, like this big record, right? You mentioned the pressure, the expectations of this follow-up. And to think that you're like, yep, nope, we're going to sew these 2 takes from 2 completely different things together. Amazing, right? What a cool thing. I mean, we've watched this, and clearly not on the same level in that regard from switching studios, but we cut on our my band's most recent record, we actually cut drums out at 606, which is
nice.
The Foo Fighters studio down there.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, beautiful room, amazing, that console, right? And we did the majority of the songs on that, but we wanted 4 songs that we tracked at a spot out in Philly called Studio 4, which also has a really cool live room, great history. But we were worried. We were like, we want it to still sound cohesive, and the drum sound for a rock band like us is a big part of that. And those are 2 very distinct rooms, So we were like, how's this going to work?
Right.
So it wasn't until the very end, like kind of trying to judge them from a mix standpoint to not take away the specialness, but also make sure that it wasn't just completely night and day and threw the whole thing off. So, dude, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because I'm so sure that nobody has ever thought about the snare density or said, and if anything, it might have added a little bit of cool surprise in the same way one might kind of bake in some special little movements or tone shift colors to a guitar track or to, an overdub from section to section. Who knows? Maybe there's a little extra magic there if there is a slight variance. I don't know. But it clearly worked for the song.
Yeah, I mean, you are touching on so many things. Same player, same drum kit, same mics, different room, but similar, not the same, but similar sounding room, similar dimensions, to be honest. But it's crazy that the mic pre's, it does sound different, but the mic pre's aren't as crazy a difference as anything else. I think that the way a drummer plays is such a huge part of it. And I think drums personally are the biggest differentiator. If you listen to the way, if I play a drum kit and then a real drummer, I'm just a guy that plays drums like, I'm a guitar player. I play guitar like a guitar player. Doom, doom, da, doom, doom, da, doom, doom, doom. I play the guitar player's beat.
Yeah. Rock beat 3. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I play that beat, and that's me, da da doom, da doom, da boom, da boom, dum dum da. So yeah, I'll sit on it, and it's maybe I get some good tone out of it because I'm snappy or whatever, but I don't know how to get body out of it. I don't know how to play with great dynamics. I'm just playing a beat, and you get another drummer sitting on it. It's like completely different. Whereas if I pick up an electric guitar with a ton of gain on it, as long as you're not bending the strings in and out of tune, it's very difficult, when playing just like a straight ahead rhythm sound, to make it that much different from one player to another. Now, I know it's going to start World War III because everybody...
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that's Pandora's box when you talk about like a guitar player's touch. There are some people out there that those are fighting words for sure, but...
No, I actually agree. I mean, when it comes to guys like Jeff Beck versus Alan Holdsworth versus... Keith Richards versus Robert Fripp, and then throw in like Albert Lee or something. Every single one of those guitar players sounds completely different.
Yep.
And not just even slightly different. Like, that is the most diverse collection of guitar players ever. You could throw a couple in, even to make it even crazier. And you give them an instrument, and immediately you know who's playing that guitar. I mean,
yeah.
I totally understand. But when it comes to like maybe playing the same part, often, not all the time, often you can pretty much sit different players into those kinds of roles.
Yeah.
With especially, like I said, with a reasonable amount of distortion on it. Now, there are differences, but God, the differences between drummers, that's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can get the best drum sound in the world, and then the drummer leaves and somebody else comes in, and you're like, what happened to my drum sound? Why is it now the worst drum sound in the world?
Yeah. No, totally, dude. And being a foundational, even, in all these genres and like, especially for that kind of experiment with, a rock band it's very feel based, right? So can you talk a little bit about, between both studios, where was the goal, because these are really emotive, like, vocal performances as well. And there's so much dynamic and so much, energy that's coming from that, and a lot of the keyboard part, or piano parts rather. How, as an engineer, how did you go about? Were there any specific things across this record that you wanted to do because you were in it from the start with them, and you're like, let's capture this element of it even better now? What did you do on that front?
I think making that second record was very, very difficult for everybody involved, and the job of an engineer engineer is to just make sure that everything runs smooth around all of the emotional kinds of stuff. I think the band wanted to stretch their wings and felt like they deserved it after selling 4 million copies of the first record. There was pressure from the record company to kind of do How to Save a Life Part 2. And that is not unusual. And it wasn't like they were saying that. They just expected to hear other songs that could be as big as How to Save a Life and Cable Car. And luckily, we delivered. I mean, we gave them You Found Me, which was a massive hit. And there was several other singles off the record, which also did great on radio. So they ended up getting their top 10 singles that they wanted. But it was a constant battle because, you know, Mike was in there as a, you know, quote unquote producer, but he was also their A&R guy. And so even if he was being encouraging in an artistic way, they wouldn't really have heard him in that way. They would have just assumed that his motive was just to get another How to Save a Life. So, and that's what happens, unfortunately. You know, when you're working for a label and any part of the production, people are going to second guess it. So there were some tensions around that. And basically, I get hired if I'm engineering, frankly, to be a lot more than that. And I say this to people because people send me emails full of resentment saying, you know, I work with this artist and they hired me in my studio to engineer, and I ended up producing the tracks. And I'll be like, what did you do? And they're like, well, you know, I gave them guitar ideas. I helped rearrange the second verse. I suggested some chord changes and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, yeah, you did some production. I was like, what did you sign on as? And they said, an engineer. And I said, you've got to be aware that, you know, people hire you to do the best job you can possibly do. And sometimes that means you're doing a lot more. But you're the one that decides to do that. I mean, if somebody hires me, whatever capacity, whether I'm mixing the song or writing the song, and usually these days, all of that, you know, I usually co-write the song and end up mixing it, you know, from beginning to end, I'm doing it and I play half the instruments, sometimes all the instruments. But that's me. I love those things. I absolutely love doing all those jobs. And on that second Fray record, yeah, I was sitting there with Dave working on guitar parts. I had a guitar, he had a guitar. We were working on ideas, bouncing ideas off everything. I wasn't the producer, but who cares? That's what I love doing. I absolutely love doing that stuff. And, you know, I remember like chord sequences going, yeah, it's really good when you went to the F minor. Oh, cool, we'll do the F. I don't have any resentment over that. That's me getting in there and rolling up my sleeves and doing the best possible job I could do. And quite often, that's why I'm getting hired. I'm getting hired by maybe inexperienced, in those days in particular, inexperienced producers that were getting opportunities to, quote unquote, produce a record. And they needed somebody that could fill in all the gaps, which is pretty much, you know, working on the drum beat, working on the guitar part, the bass line, the keyboard part, helping finish taking the arrangement over the thing, over the line, and getting tones and recording it really well, and et cetera, you know, all of those things are things I pride myself on. And that is very, very important. If there's anybody's listening to this who's an up and coming producer and engineer and mixer, you've got to swallow your pride and do the best possible job. If you're in England, I don't know what we call it in America, what you call it in America, but in England we call it job's worth. A job's worth is one of those guys that, there's usually guys, you know, it's like, it's more than my job's worth to do anything extra. I don't know what the version, what's the version of that over here?
Oh, I've got to find it and dig it up, but it definitely doesn't beat that.
You're not paying me to do that.
Yeah.
You get ahead by over-delivering.
Yeah, wow.
Always under-promise and over-deliver.
What incredible sage advice. And what I think, honestly, Warren, a beautiful way to wrap it up, because that encompasses so much about, you know, how if you're getting in there, you know, do the job at hand, whatever it might require, to serve the song, you know, instead of someone's ego, right? And if someone is asking or opening a window and extending that kind of trust, yeah, go ahead and and accept it. Say yes to that and explore where it goes. Don't be the person that's like, well, that's not what I do. It's like, if they're, you know, that's sure. Part of being in that studio and rising to that moment. And I love that. So what a perfect way to kind of wrap this thing, because I mean, obviously there is much more. And I highly advise for everybody to go and check out some of the other deep dives that you've done some of these songs and many others, where can they find all of that stuff? Obviously, we'll link to it in the show notes, but shout out everything and anything, because you and the whole Produce Like a Pro community is crazy.
Yeah, it's obviously Produce Like a Pro is a website that has, we have an academy there. You can join that, and every week we do mix critiques. We have hundred and something multi-tracks in there, and new lessons going up all the time. But of course, the YouTube channel is completely free, and there's tons of multi-tracks you can download from there. Tons. It's what I love. One of the things that I love most is the way I grew up in this business is the way everybody has to now. There's no nepotism. I'm not related to anybody. I don't have. I have friends that grew up with me that got successful in the music industry, but none of us. There was no older brother that was handing me stuff, no dad or uncle or anything like that. I didn't go to music school, and I didn't intern at a studio, and I didn't learn to be an assistant. I was actually in a band, and I got record deals. I've had 5 record deals in my career. So I had record deals, and I wrote songs, and I got to learn how to produce and engineer by having my own, 4 tracks, ADATs, then DAWs in that order. So all of this stuff you see around was bought from me just grafting and working really hard at what I did. And that is how most people have to do this these days. So what I've done is I've written a book. I don't know when this comes out, but I've written a book that comes out in January. It's 475 pages, and it's all on recording. It's everything I've learned over my whole career. It took 3 years to write. It is going to be the most comprehensive book on recording you'll ever see. It's pretty insane.
Oh, man.
It's thick.
Let's see it.
Amazing.
Look at that.
It's insane. It's got diagrams, photos. It is really, it's the psychology of working with artists. Pre-production in there, quotes from all of the different people I've interviewed over the years. It's absolutely intense. It's not a bunch of photocopies put together like some people's books.
Love that.
I do love that.
And I did this with my very good friend, Mr. Jerry Hammock, who wrote 6 books on the Beatles recording. He and I painstakingly sat down for multiple hours and went through tons of stuff. He just picked my brain and asked me hundreds and hundreds of questions. And we just went through and came up with something that was really amazing. And we did look at all of the competition and made sure that we were doing everything they were doing and more. So we want this to be the most comprehensive book on recording. It's called Home Studio Recording. It will be out in January, depending on when this episode is aired. Yeah, I'm really super excited. So yes, you can go to producelikeapro.com and you can sign up for the email list, get a whole bunch of free goodies. The book is obviously something I'm really super proud of.
There you go. And as you should be.
Amazing, Warren.
Thank you.
I commend you so much for putting that together and taking that on, especially too, because for anybody that is listening to the show or is listening to that, that is part of the reason, I think, what drove you to kind of pull all of this together is trying to pass along what you know and do that. And it's for Tom and I, it's the same thing as building a space that people can learn from other people, other artist stories, other producer stories. And that's why we do the show. And we are so grateful that you have, taken some time to share some of these stories with our audience, Warren. And again, congratulations on the release of that. And we will happily put that out there and co-sign that and get our audience to check it out if they aren't going to already.
Thank you ever so much.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Of course. It's been our pleasure. I think one of the things that this conversation really helped reinforce inside of me is the idea that creativity is actually just solving problems, right? Whether that problem be the piece of gear that decided to quit out on you at the worst moment, or maybe it's solving the riddle of what word or phrase or melody needs to come next to keep the idea of your song afloat. It's all about problem solving, right? Sometimes it's about under-promising and then finding a way to over-deliver on those expectations. And also, I think what this conversation showed is what makes Warren a great producer or a great engineer is not just his knowledge of gear or his ability to mix a great sounding record, but his ability to stay calm under pressure and to have confidence in himself and the people around him to figure out the next problem that comes their way. We're all here because we want to make better music. We want to make better art. We want to be better creators. So if you want to be a better creator, I guess maybe the takeaway here is learn to love the problems, because they are inevitable and they'll never stop coming. But if we can learn to reframe the problems that we face, not as setbacks, but as opportunities to evolve as creatives, then we'll never run out of inspiration. And we'll never run out of new ways to evolve as artists. So if you've been enjoying the season so far, please help us solve the problem of reaching new people by leaving us a quick review wherever you're listening to this, and we will catch you next time on Verano.